Did you know that up until 2019, sockeye salmon had not made their way into the Okanagan Lake of British Columbia in about 60 years? How did that happen? So first of all, I want to look at talking about what the typical lifespan is of a sockeye salmon. Like the other four salmon species in the northeastern Pacific Ocean, sockeye salmon start their lives from eggs in freshwater rivers and streams, sometimes thousands of kilometers from the ocean. The following spring, after the eggs were fertilized in the previous fall, they hatch and spend a year to three living in lakes until they reach about the smolt stage, where they migrate down to the sea. Once they mature after about 2 to 3 years at sea, sometimes a little longer, they swim up the rivers and streams to where they were born. They spawn, the females lay the eggs, and the males fertilize them, and then they die and they're eaten by scavengers. The whole cycle starts over again. It's one of the marvels of nature. Okanagan Lake is a massive lake in the interior of British Columbia, Canada. It is almost 90 miles long, or 140 kilometers, and 2.5 to 3 miles wide, or 4 to 5 kilometers in width. The Okanagan River flows south from Okanagan Lake through Skaha Lake, Vaso Lake, and the Soyuz Lakes, where it crosses into the United States and flows south for about another 120 kilometers until it reaches the Columbia River. From there, the Columbia travels south and then west for another 700-800 kilometers before it enters the Pacific Ocean by Astoria, Oregon. Up until the early part of the 20th century and the growth of human population along the watershed of the Columbia River and its tributaries like the Okanagan, many fish species, including a few salmon species, were thriving in the region. And then it all changed. As early as the 1890s, Washington state officials realized that the ever-growing population along the Columbia River Basin, as well as all the activities associated with it, like dredging to be able to get barges in farther inland past Portland, and then later on damming, what kind of risks these would pose on migrating salmon population. And then, of course, the first major dam was built at Bonneville, Washington in 1937, and successive dams were built after that. And once those dams were built, or in their construction, there was always the issue of the importance of migrating salmon for some, and some it wasn't so important, and all the obstacles that came along with having to deal with the salmon population run. And we'll get into that a little bit more here. Once several dams were constructed, and even in the construction of each individual dam, there's always the problem of trying to figure out what to do with the salmon going upstream and the salmon coming down. The upstream situation, usually with dam construction, they could figure out ways to get the adult populations upstream all right with some kinds of fish ladders, but there was always the issue of the juveniles coming downstream. As far back as the 1950s, there was a debate over dwindling fish stock, despite the fact that a lot of spawning grounds inland were blocked by the dams. Basically, a lot of dam advocates thought of the migrating fish as a hindrance to their plans. When many of the dams were built, they had ladders, fish ladders, but were only designed for adult salmon. If the dam didn't have a collection facility for juvenile salmon to be moved from top pools to bottom pools, the tiny fish were relegated to going through the turbines. Finally, in about the 1960s, adjustments were made to the dams and allowed most juvenile salmon to pass relatively safely in most cases. In 1982, a second powerhouse at the Bonneville Dam was built, and it was soon evident that it was a major juvenile fish killer. It was shut down for most of the 1990s during juvenile salmon migration season. The issue was finally solved with a new system installed in 2003. Predatory birds and fish became a huge problem for the migrating juveniles, so the Bonneville Power Administration financed a bounty award for the fisheries for pike minnow. Literally hundreds of thousands of these pike minnow fish were caught and turned into receiving stations each year so that they were not there to kill off all the downstream migrating juveniles. Despite multiple studies over time and the improvement of dams to get juvenile salmon downstream safely, the mortality rate is still considerably high. Many studies and proposals continue. Currently, there are 9 dams on the Columbia River leading to the confluence of the Okanagan River tributary. And after that, on the Okanagan, on the American side of the border, there is the one dam just on the south end of Osoyoos Lake. And now at the Canadian side of the border from Osoyoos Lake north. As early as the beginning of the 20th century, dredging in parts of the Okanagan River on the Canadian side started to occur. Then followed channeling and straightening of the route to manage the flooding. Over time, 3 dams on the Canadian side of the border were built on the Okanagan River. One of them, the McIntyre Dam close to Oliver. Then the Okanagan Falls Dam at the south side of Skaha Lake, and the Penticton Dam on the north end of Penticton, north end of the city of Penticton. The original McIntyre Dam was built in the 1920s. And it wasn't until 2009 that it was refitted to let salmon get by. Up until that time, salmon could only get in as far as Osoyoos Lake. One of the things I found quite interesting was from Osoyoos to Penticton, about 85% of that river basin was either channeled and straightened, and it wiped out 90% of the original salmon natural habitat. But it gets better. The news starts to get good after this. In the more recent years, like 20 plus years, there has been a concerted effort by the Okanagan Nations Alliance to restore much of the original spawning grounds of the sockeye salmon in the Okanagan. The Okanagan Nations Alliance is a conglomerate of First Nation groups from around the Okanagan watershed, including both sides of the border. As most people know, if you don't know, the sockeye salmon harvest has been a key focal point of First Nations cultural identity for millennia. So, having noticed the plight of the salmon, they decided to take action. And boy, did they ever take action, along with, obviously government agencies' help. The Okanagan Nation has built new spawning beds throughout the Okanagan River Basin. They have constructed fish hatcheries to introduce the sockeye back into the lakes and rivers of the Okanagan, and they have been involved with refitting and diversions for the sockeye to get past or around dams in the Okanagan region. As mentioned earlier, sockeye were able to get around the McIntyre Dam by Oliver with the refitting in 2009, and it was reported by members of the ONA that high water levels in 2010 enabled the salmon to get over the Okanagan Falls Dam and into Skaha Lake for the first time in many years. Also, in 2013, a dormant fish ladder at Okanagan Falls was reactivated. In 2019, the final hurdle for the sockeye run was lifted. A wooden gate at the Penticton Dam was finally lifted that had blocked the salmon migration since its construction in 1953. The gate blocked a fish ladder that was actually built and left inoperable for the entire 66 years. The first confirmed sockeye back into the Penticton Channel was in 2011, and the 2018 run was a whopping 24,000 into the same area. The sockeye were literally seen circling at the Penticton Dam when the dam obstacle was lifted. In conclusion, this has been a story of resiliency and hard work on the behalf of First Nations people as well as government agencies in concert, as well as the determination of these magnificent fish to survive. One of the biggest possible obstacles of the reintroduction of the sockeye salmon to their natural breeding grounds at Skaha and Okanagan lakes was if they posed a threat to the fish populations that have already resided in the area, namely the kokanee salmon, which is basically a landlocked salmon. Repeated studies have shown otherwise. Another factor that could hamper the migration of sockeye back to their original breeding territories is ever-increasing river temperatures, largely due to global warming. It has been noted, however, that the fish seem to be adjusting and starting their migrations up the rivers and streams earlier to avoid the overheating in the summertime. I'll keep track of this story moving forward and provide updates. Please like and subscribe if you'd like to follow my journey of telling more stories of habitat reclamation. Thank you.